We need everybody. We need the guy in the pickup truck. We need the busy suburban mum who's got an SUV full of soccer gear. We need someone who loves their Saturday night burger. That's the people that we need on the team. Setting aside that judgment and setting aside, that projection of our own perfectionism onto other people and just saying, none of this is perfect. 89% of people around the world are really concerned about climate change and they want more to be done. So there's this huge disconnect between the level of concern we actually feel and the level of concern that we think others feel. And so knowing that the people around you care as well opens up the doors to start conversations and building community around the things that we have in common and the values that we share. People are going to think I'm a crazy hippie if I raise these concerns. Are they going to think I'm a little bit of a fringe dweller? And the most important thing for people to know is that you're not. You're unbelievably normal. The system is no longer working for us, I think is probably the challenge of our times. What we're doing is making a difference. We're seeing coral gardens come back from artificial reefs. It brought tears to my eyes because these efforts matter.
We're here with Allie Wines, lawyer turned award-winning global advisor on climate communication and CEO of the Climate Communication Alliance. And we're talking about climate change and the stories we tell ourselves.
So, Allie, it turns out climate action doesn't begin with guilt and fear and shame or even individual action. It actually begins in relationship. So I have this quote that I wanted to read, and I kind of want to know what you think about it. It says, "Merely by falling in love with the world, you will begin to make it better. Human beings will work to their dying breath to save something they love." And that's from Margaret Renkel. So, Allie, maybe you can tell us a story. How did you fall in love with nature?
I love that quote. That resonates with me so much. I grew up in Australia and I was really lucky to have an aunt who lived in the most magical spot right by a lake with the mountains in the background. And she was incredibly outdoorsy. So she taught me to ski and hike and forage for mushrooms and ride horses. So I spent so much of my childhood doing that. And it was just the place that brought me joy and peace and happiness, all the good things in life. And I'm not sure I really realized that until I got older and I went to university and I fell into this very corporate career, which took me around the world and took me away from nature in so many ways. And we moved to Canada about 10 years ago. And I don't think my mental health was in the greatest place. I was burned out. I was exhausted. I had 2 young kids. I'd been working 60-hour weeks. And I feel really lucky that I didn't actually have a job to come to. And so that meant that I could explore my city on foot and get out back into nature again and introduce my kids to what it's like to just be out in the wilderness and being in amongst the trees. And it was life-changing, I think, even though I'd grown up with that, just to reconnect with it as an adult and to realize the benefits that it brought me and the connections that it created between me and my kids and how special that time was. That was such a resonant moment to think that nature brings us all of these benefits. And I think it set me on the trajectory I'm on now.
Thank you so much for sharing. I love how you're bringing in that future generation, that next generation of people that are going to care, right? So it kind of changes as parents when we have children and we see, this is a bigger responsibility that we have, right?
Completely. Completely. And I think when you see the way that kids interact with nature, it's so, organic is kind of maybe a funny word to use, but it is, because they'll just wander around and they'll pick up a stick and they're fascinated by the stick and they're fascinated by the bugs and they understand intuitively, I think, that we are all connected and that these tiny things can be so interesting.
Makes me think about is the actual community that we have. We commune, quote unquote, with nature. We have community with nature. And this odd thing that we tend to do is we take on our responsibility with climate around climate change as individuals, right? It's like we stop the thought of being in community and we think, I've got to do this all on my own. You've introduced us to some really interesting research that shows us that lifestyle only climate messaging often backfires. This, you individually need to be making all of these changes in your own lifestyle to save the planet. And that guilt and fear is unmotivating. But what seems to be most motivating is this collective action. People most engage, I'm kind of quoting for some of these articles that you shared with us. People engage more when they understand how collective action works. Maybe we can talk even a little bit more about what that means, collective action. Our shared values, our understanding and just recognition and awe and beauty in nature, thinking about future generations. And those are the things we love to talk about on the podcast, right? But it so happens that research demonstrates that that's what actually works to make the change. So our question to you is, how do we move our individual selves from this one way of thinking, like if I don't, as you mentioned earlier, scrub out that peanut butter, jar and put it in the recycling. If I don't I'll feel guilty about it for weeks. Instead, how do I shift to a more communal-based thinking about climate change?
Yeah. I think it's really important to recognize from the outset that that mode of thinking didn't come about on its own, that
Mm.
people who have a vested interest in the status quo and making sure that we keep on burning old-fashioned dirty fuels, that we keep pulling those out of the ground because they make billions of dollars out of it. They've invested vast amounts of money in making sure that we think that way and that we feel paralyzed by needing to take the weight of the world onto our own shoulders. So I think there can almost be a secondary layer of guilt of, I feel guilty that I feel guilty. So
Yes.
I think
Yes.
moving away from that and understanding that we've all been collectively hoodwinked, I guess, into thinking that this is our fault and our responsibility. So being able to sit with that and feel okay with that, I think, is step number one. But I think number two is recognizing that individual action, well, it's that kind of recognition and knowing, I suppose, first of all, that individual action, it makes a difference in that it's a form of communication itself. If I walk to the grocery store rather than drive and I talk to my neighbors about that on the way, that can be a really positive impact. So it doesn't hurt to take on some of those actions. But what really makes a difference is when we come together as a community, and we've lost so much of that. So I think the first step is just talking to the people around you and recognizing that they actually share these concerns. One piece of data that I find really fascinating is that the UN has done a study, and it was huge. They interviewed tens and tens of thousands of people around the world. And the average number that came back was that 89% of people around the world are really concerned about climate change and they want more to be done. But we all think that only about 43% of us share that concern. So there's this huge disconnect between the level of concern we actually feel and the level of concern that we think others feel. And so knowing that the people around you care as well, I think is incredibly valuable because it opens up the doors to start those conversations and to start building community around the things that we have in common and the values that we share.
I know you have a lot more to share there, but that is really resonating with me. But you're right. We don't talk about it, that's a concern,
Yeah.
because why? Because there's a shame around it. Like, I don't know what I can possibly do, or I don't do enough anyway. Like, I don't have enough solar panels on my own roof. So I don't want to be talking about climate change because I feel like I could be judged about that. I know what's stopping us from like that conversation.
I think that fearfulness is a big part of it, that there's this sense that you're not allowed to act until you're perfect yourself, which is ridiculous. Since humans learned how to use fire, we've had an impact on the planet. So all of us have some sort of an impact. We need to acknowledge that and be fine with it, because it is. It's just how the world works. And we know that 80% of the world's global emissions come from the burning of fossil fuels, not from you and I washing out our peanut butter jars, as you mentioned.
I,
So,
what you
yeah,
just
so
said.
I think kind of overcoming that perfectionism, but I think there's a fearfulness there as well of being judged. Are people going to think I'm like a crazy hippie if I raise these concerns? Are they going to think I'm a little bit of a fringe dweller? And the most important thing for people to know is that you're not. You're unbelievably normal.
Yeah, I like to think of that. Climate change action is actually very popular,
Extremely popular.
extremely popular. There is
And
just a
across all
disconnect.
demographics, all political persuasions, conservative people tend to be in favor of, they would probably call it conservation or call it by a different name, but they favor the preservation of our natural environment and the things that make the places we live special.
You know what, Shannon, I'm thinking about, we talk about this all the time, the languaging around it.
Mm.
The language that we decide to use makes all the difference. And so often the right word isn't there for us. But you're right. If I'm using the word conservation, I'm probably appealing to a different group rather than using, climate action or climate change.
Was just thinking, when anyone says perfectionism, right? Jen and I kind of tune in because I think a lot of us struggle with that. So I love the idea of really working on that from within, right? If perfectionism is something that's on the table for you, right? It also aligns in this situation because we can't be perfect about how we go about our daily routines.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think not being conscious of not projecting that as well.
Mm.
Something that I think the climate movement needs to work on is being welcoming versus being judgmental. And to create that collective action that we were talking about at the beginning, we need everybody. We need the guy in the pickup truck. We need the busy suburban mum who's got an SUV full of soccer gear. We need someone who loves their Saturday night burger. Like, that's the people that we need on the team. And so that means, I think, setting aside that judgment and setting aside, yeah, that projection of our own perfectionism onto other people and just saying none of this is perfect.
I mean, I really need to sit with this. This is such an important part of this conversation because it's that perfectionism. I love that you use that word, Allie, and I love that you dug in, Shannon. We're all, because you were mentioning we all change the planet, but we're all complicit. Like I have my iPhone, that is using up lithium. Like I don't even know all the things. And then I feel some guilt around it. And then I'm not a perfect representative of climate change. So how dare I have this conversation? But you're right. Like all of those different populations that you were talking about, like, where are we with that? Like, how do we like embrace it? How do we bring them all in? And more talking, you're saying like just more talking about it. If we would just get more comfortable with sharing, like, I'm really concerned.
I think, like, I feel uncomfortable with that sometimes. Like, I'm very imperfect when it comes to, being a good climate citizen. And I feel really awkward and nervous telling people, I don't have an EV. I nearly always forget my reusable mug, all those little actions that I feel personally guilty about. I think, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be telling people this, but I should, because
Yes.
that's all of us. And I think the more that we can do that, the more we kind of, we create that kind of relaxed environment for other people to be imperfect as well.
It's certainly more welcoming, right? When we can speak like that. And this kind of reminds me of a conversation we we talked to Alexander Laszlo recently, and he is a systems thinker. And one of the things we talked about is, the systems are not going to save us, and that is a sad thing for me, and I think a lot of people to come to terms with, that it's actually the humans within the systems, right, that need the work. So how do we get the people within the systems to actually change?
Yeah, it's such a great point and such a difficult one because I think there's a feedback loop there where, yes, the people construct the systems, but the systems inform our values and our way of being. And to create systems change means human beings don't like change. We're unbelievably resistant to it. I think they've done laboratory experiments that show chimpanzees are more cognitively flexible than human beings. And so helping people to understand that the system is no longer working for us, I think is probably the challenge of our times. But my sense is that people are beginning to wake up to that because it's starting to impact all of us. We're seeing it in affordability. Climate change is one of the major factors driving up grocery prices. People are starting to see it in wealth and social inequality and feel like, hang on a minute, this system doesn't feel fair. And I think when you're exerting that pressure, not necessarily from outside the system, because we're all participants in the system, but when we start to exert that pressure on the people who have influence, I think it begins to help them understand. And I think there's other ways of doing it as well. I think getting people out into nature is a small but really valuable step. And you're starting to see more and more corporate retreats where executives are getting out and spending time with Indigenous people in the natural environment and starting to learn their way of thinking and relating to the land. So things like that can really help. It can take generations, but working with school kids and building up their love of nature, you're creating pollinator gardens in urban environments that start community conversations. All these little steps count. And as someone said to me once, like, there is no one avenue of climate action. There's no right way. We need pressure from every corner, and that might look like taking to the streets. It might look like changing shareholder voting rules. It might look like which banks you invest your money with. All of these things make a difference, and I think they help exert pressure on the people who work within the system to recognize that the system needs to change.
It's often, Jen and I talk about storytelling and the stories we tell ourselves, right? Often kind of project into the world about how we really act and feel. I'm curious, what do the oil companies and these big corporations, right? What is the story that they're telling themselves?
I think the vast majority of people who work in those industries are good, kind, values-led people. I really do. And I think for most of them, the story is that they're a very important contributor to the economy and that they're helping people's lives get better on almost a macro level, and that they're creating jobs for, people in rural communities. I think there's all of these stories, which are in very large part true stories. They're valid things to tell yourself. I think it's probably what's key is, what's the story you're not telling yourself? What's the part that you're leaving out that is uncomfortable and difficult to sit with?
That sounds like a shadow, right? Anybody that's done shadow work, it's those things you don't want to admit, those things you don't want to see
Mm,
about yourself are the really important things to kind of bring to the surface.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I very much think so. I had a friend who works in the industry who's very pro-climate. And her view is that if the activists and, kind of annoying people who are complaining about these industries would just get out of the way, then they would step in and that the market would correct itself and that the companies would undertake climate action of their own accord. And we know that that doesn't work. We've given them lots of opportunities to make that happen, and they don't see enough profit in it, so it doesn't happen. But I think that's a very genuine belief there. So, yeah, exactly. I think it's that kind of, yeah, the shadow is a perfect description.
I like how you're talking about coming at this from so many different angles. I think people need to, just like many things we need to do in life, what is the space where you can make the change that, what is your sphere of influence, right? For the soccer mom, that's going to be something different than the corporate executive. But there are places where work, it sounds like, can be done if there is some kind of introspection or maybe greater falling in love with nature. Or it makes me think about work that I've read about shifting, right? Like we're not taught, it's so hard, like you're mentioning, for humans to make like change look so bad and scary and huge, but like gentle shifts look easier. Is the gentle shift more spending time, the awe of nature? I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think so. And I think they become self reinforcing because you take a small action that feels manageable and you get positive feedback. You think, oh, that kind of worked. Okay, maybe I'll try something a little bit bigger. So maybe it's a meat-free Monday and then you move to, a couple of nights where you're trying a new dish and you can say, well, that's not as scary or as weird as I thought. That went okay. Or it's having that conversation with your neighbor of, oh, wow, our local ice rink hasn't frozen again this year, or my plants are dying in the heat. Are you noticing the same thing? And that goes okay. And so you try it again. So, yeah, I definitely think those small shifts are really, really
Yeah.
powerful and important.
Yeah. And back to what you're saying about that awareness, just having more conversations, having more, I noticed that, you know.
Exactly. It's crucial. And I think people really underestimate the power of talking because we're not told that that's a form of action. But actually, it's one of the most powerful things that any of us can do.
Shannon,
Because it
dialogue
helps
is
regulate.
action. Yeah.
Dialogue is action. This all takes place in that relational space, right? We can't do it on our own. And I was thinking in these conversations, they can be very uncomfortable, right? With your friends, with your community members. But the truth is, and we talk about this, the road to personal growth is approaching those uncomfortable conversations, right? So how does it become more comfortable to talk about these sort of things?
It's practice.
Yeah.
Like anything, like kicking a soccer ball, it's practice. And I think it's kind of being smart about picking your audience. There are some people that you're never going to shift them and you're going to exhaust yourself and burn yourself out and put yourself off further conversations if you're trying to kind of hammer home a message with someone who just has complete walls up. But it's those middle ground people where you can start saying exactly as you commented, Jen, this is what I'm noticing. And it just opens the door a little bit. And you don't have to convince them in one go. You don't have to get them to change their voting practices or install a heat pump, in a one conversation. It's just that small repeated effort, I think, that can slowly start to shift those thought processes and relationships.
So I think it reminds me of this experience that I had, and we talk about awe, right?
Mm.
The importance of awe. And I remember I was in Alaska at Glacier National Park, and I was on this boat and I was looking up, and it was this moment for me where the awe, the presence of something larger really made me stop and change the way I see basically everything. Looking out at that glacier, I realized, man, I am just a tiny speck, right? In this vast time and space, here I am showing up, right? But, looking at it in that like longer view, that larger scope, really puts things into perspective. It did for me anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I think is a disappearing experience in our world. And I don't think it's just me saying that. I think there's studies and research that are beginning to look at this. One of the things I find really fascinating is the language that we use around nature. And what that has been happening is that our words for nature are disappearing from the dictionary and they're being replaced by words for technology. So I think in the Children's Dictionary in the UK recently, words like meadow and bluebell were taken out. And we're seeing more words, related to AI and the digital world that we now live in. And one of the big pieces of work that's being done to address that is bringing nature back into urban environments so that we can maybe start creating that awe on like a very micro scale, but it can help to shift that thinking with people. So, even murals on a city wall depicting natural scenes or a flower bed on a very busy urban street that can reconnect people with life and nature and growth. And then hopefully that can kind of ladder up to the sort of experience you were talking about, Shannon, where we're just blown away by this unbelievable world that we live in.
There's nothing like putting your hands in the dirt. We talk about these, building community gardens and things. Is there a more grounding experience, right? Than putting your hands in the dirt, putting your feet on the ground and really feeling, that power from the earth kind of coming up into everything that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Literally grounding.
Yes.
I'll walk you through some experiences sometimes that I have in nature. And sometimes I have these moments, like just last night, actually, when we got home from the Super Bowl party, right? And we looked up and the sky was so clear and beautiful, and you could see every star in the sky. And there was so much joy in that moment, but it's coupled, Allie, with sometimes sadness, right? Because I'm like, I can't believe what we're doing. Right? And I find that in that space right there is where the discomfort happens. Like, I don't know if I could be more expansive when I have those two competing feelings. Um, I'm not even sure what I want to think or say about that, except that that's something that often happens to me. Maybe it's a shift that I need to do in my own self rather than feeling an element of defeat. How do I kind of make that shift? Like I say, I know there are people out there like Allie Wines who who are really doing this great work, right? Like,
Yeah. There's a word for that. It's called solastalgia. And it's the grief of, I think, being in beauty and being in that sense of awe and feeling the grief for what's disappearing. And oh man, I feel that all the time,
mhm.
Jen. I just relate so much to what you're saying. And I think it can detract from the magic of those moments. I don't know if this is kind of good advice that's grounded in psychology, but what I try to do is I try to almost like the Mr. Rogers kind of moment of it. I look for the good. And so I try to think, gosh, I try to say to myself, what are 5 things that have really improved? And I make myself kind of go through that process to recognize that, yeah, there are tens of thousands of people out here doing this work. And I can think of places where fish are coming back to rivers or wetlands have been restored. And I just try so hard to remind myself of that because nature does heal. And there's so many people doing the work of trying to make that happen.
I think telling those stories too, those stories that where climate action actually worked, right? Because it does. We have this story here where I live in New Jersey. It's called the Bobcat Alley Project, and it's been going on a long time. We participate here on our farm, and it took time. It took a little bit of resources, not even that much, and education. And over 20 years now, the bobcat was almost extinct in New Jersey. And now they are flourishing, right? We see them all over the place. I see them here on the farm, and they're such sweet animals. There's nothing to fear about a bobcat, right? Just a little bit of change, a little bit of education, and really only a little bit of time to see that entire population come back healthy and strong.
Absolutely. I think this is the next step. I think we've done a really good job of raising awareness about climate change. The number of people that are concerned tells us that. But now we need to help people understand that, number one, we have the solutions. Number two, they work and we're doing them and the change is happening. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's really crucial to give people that sense of possibility and hope, not in a naive way, but to say, hey, your effort actually matters. What you're doing is worthwhile and please keep doing it.
Because that doom and gloom language is just not serving us.
It's just not serving us. It's really not. It has such a chilling effect because if it doesn't work, then you sort of drive people into this hedonistic, well, it's the end of the world. We might as well have a party kind of mentality. And what we're doing is making a difference. We're seeing coral gardens come back from artificial reefs. I went to an amazing talk yesterday by Doug Smith, who's a wildlife biologist who was responsible for restoring the wolves to Yellowstone. And that was just inspirational to see the graph that he put up, to see the wolf habitat that had expanded back into the continental US. It brought tears to my eyes because these efforts matter. And exactly as you said, Shannon, it doesn't take that long. 20 years and he's basically restored the wolf population in this one area to what it was naturally able to support. And that's changed the whole rest of the ecosystem. It's incredible.
It really is. And we need to incorporate this into the stories we're telling, right? There are so many examples where, climate action actually works. It brings back these populations of wolves, these populations of bobcats that we thought were gone.
Yeah.
Right? Just a little bit of work can make all the difference over time.
And it works on an individual level. My mum has solar panels on her roof and she doesn't pay electricity bills anymore. She's retired and that's fantastic for her. It makes a genuinely meaningful difference in her life. So
that is a real bonus right now to tell our audience because electric bills are skyrocketing.
Seriously.
right now.
Absolutely.
Right? With all the AI farms that we're building,
Yeah.
the things that are, growing right alongside that is our electric bill. And that's not very popular.
So, Allie, do you find that telling some of these positive stories and the way things are working is a better way to shift thinking? Tell me a little bit about the work you're doing around that.
Yeah, what I'm really interested in is evidence-based approaches to climate communication. And we actually live in a really exciting time for that. We've had the science of the climate itself has developed so much in the last 25, 30 years. But we're now seeing the science of climate communication catch up to that. And that's really compelling because it means that we can tell these stories in an effective way and we can help to shift those hearts, minds, and behaviors. And those positive stories we know now are the most effective way to shift people. And it's important to get the balance right. We need people to understand that we're still in a pretty sticky situation. Things are not great. And we're doing things to fix it and they're working. And if we all come together to support that we can actually drive change much farther and faster than we think that we can. So, yeah, I would love to see more and more of those stories of solutions in action coming across.
Yeah.
There's I used to work in change management and John Cotter is sort of considered the godfather of change management. And he always talked about this idea of the burning platform. If we want people to make a shift, if we want them to jump, literally sort of almost have to light a fire under their feet. They have to have a very compelling reason. And we've done that, but we need to give people something to jump to. We need to give them this fantastic vision of, here's this great future that we can have. And here's this really soft, comfy landing and it's not scary. Take the leap. We've got this great future in front of us. it's going to work out.
It's the future we deserve.
It's the future we deserve.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that. We need a future to look forward to. That's true.
Absolutely.
So let's shift a little bit. I want to ask you, Allie, what is a tool that sustains you in this work? This is hard work that you're doing. What is a tool that sustains you and helps you maybe become more connected with nature, or can sustain you generally in the work that you're doing?
Yeah. I have to get outside. I have to go and be around nature. I find when I'm at my desk all week and part of my job is reading the news and knowing what's happening in the world, that can be really heavy, really difficult. And I find if I don't get outside, then it really does start to weigh on me. But just going for a walk in my neighborhood, I have a beautiful ravine down the street from me. If I can get further afield, that can be even better. And as strange as it sounds, I love talking to the trees. If I'm on a
Oh,
steep
I love
hike,
that.
You and Shannon.
I know. Allie, finally someone else who talks to the trees, and it doesn't sound crazy when it comes from
I
Allie Wines, right?
I do. If I'm on a steep hike and I need to lean on a tree to come up, I'll stop. I'll be like, "Thank you, tree."
Mhm. They're
It's
very
just
good listeners.
they're very good listeners.
And there's
Yeah.
tremendous wisdom to be learned, not only from the trees, but the birds and the rocks and the sun and the stars and, everything that is beaming with life,
Yes.
in
Well,
this
and it
beautiful.
is, and we're connected to it. We share
Mhm.
our DNA with the trees and the bugs, and they depend on us, but we depend on them as well. And I love that concept of interrelationality and the fact that the earth is just one living, breathing system that we happen to be a little part poking out of. And I think being out in nature kind of reminds you of that and reminds you that we need all of these species to exist in a healthy way.
Yeah, and that helps us fall in love, right? When we're out there experiencing what Mother Nature has to offer, we really can absorb what it means to have that feeling. I was thinking, just a little tip that I learned this past year, when those moments happen, those moments of awe, right? Those moments that literally stop you in your tracks, they happen to all of us. There's something we need to do when that happens. It's called sinking in. Okay. And it's basically, they describe it as like, when you get into a bath and you kind of, you sink into that moment, right? You have to sink into that moment when those moments of awe really happen, and stop and put your hand on your heart and really take it all in. That's that's actually what helps change us as human beings in a lasting way, right? When we can really, really absorb those moments, because they're happening all the time. It's just that, mindfulness and then acknowledgement of when they are happening.
I love that you said they happen all the time. I think that's so true because we may be we're more attuned to noticing them on a vacation or when we're in a really special place. But I think, you can walk down the street at night and see the stars, Jen, like you were saying, or, a beautiful flower that's growing out of a crack in the pavement. And that can give us that same feeling. It's just remembering to notice it. I really like that.
I am really, really wishing for spring right now. All of this talk about flowers and gardens, and that's something I'm very, very into, and it has changed everything for me. So, what do you think, Allie, besides going out in nature, which we all think is probably the most important thing that we can do, right? Is kind of develop that relationship, that deeper felt sense. But for our audience, what is something they can do today? Like a small action, not towards fixing the climate, but reconnecting kind of with that living world. What's an invitation to our audience? What's one thing they can do just today?
It's a great question. To reconnect with the living world, I mean, step outside, just breathe the air and think about what is happening in that moment. You have the oxygen molecules going into your body. There's this magical alchemistic process where you're turning that into carbon dioxide and breathing it out. I just think, this is amazing when you stop to think how the world works and how our breath feeds the trees and their breath feeds ours. Just pausing for a moment to think about that. It actually blows your mind when you consider it.
It's
So
magic.
it's magic. It's magic. Yeah.
Every moment of every day, Mother Nature is creating magic.
Yeah.
And we're all here a part of that, which is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. That we are nature,
We
that
are.
there isn't separation.
We are one. This is Jen and I, our favorite part of the conversation. We try to think of something that we that really resonated. What is our key takeaway from this conversation?
Yes, Allie, I think I need the spelling of this. But the term that you named, solastalgia,
That was
is that
mine, Jen.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
We always do this. That's
Yeah, it's
okay.
the same.
That's okay.
I have a different one too, but then I probably will be taking yours again. Your second choice. Wow. I love that. I love this nostalgia for the world as it was, even as I am in awe of what I'm seeing. Am I getting that definition right?
Yeah. Perfect.
Is my life experience. And I think the life experience of many people, and sometimes if we can put a name to it, it helps us better understand the place where we're standing and share with others that they might be feeling the same way too. So thank you so much for that term.
It's a good one.
It's a good one. I don't know who came up with it. Rebecca Solnit wrote a beautiful essay about it. So yeah, I highly recommend that if you have some time to check it out.
Thank you.
The thing I'm taking away with me is this idea that we need to fall in love with nature, in order to really want to protect it. Right? That's where we started, and that's what I'm taking with me here.
I think for me, it's connection. You two talk so much about relationships. And what I've been thinking throughout the course of this conversation is that's really what drives change. It's the little conversations that we have over the garden fence or with our colleagues around the water cooler. It's our relationship with the natural environment around us. We've lost so much of that in recent times, I think, and restoring those connections and restoring our humanity, I think, is such an important way to just create some positive change in the world.
Yes, that is beautiful. Thank you so much for that.
Can I add one last thing that
Oh, yeah.
you mentioned that I need to remember, and that is that nature can heal.
Yeah.
And I just get so wrapped up sometimes and I forget that. And just remembering that nature can heal, and all of those examples that you both shared about that was really, really important to me. Thank you.
And it's a symbiotic healing. As we heal, nature heals, right? And we heal each other. We are one, which is a beautiful way to end this conversation, right? We are all connected. We are all connected. And this conversation, I think, helped to connect us a little bit more. So thank you so much, Allie, for coming on today and helping us talk and helping us understand all these really complex issues.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much. I could talk to you both for hours. It's a fascinating area, and I really appreciate your passion for creating those connections in the world. It's lovely.
Thank you, Allie. That's just an invitation to come back. So you're welcome back to Connected with Jen and Shannon anytime. So thank you so much.
Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Allie.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and follow us on socials.
It helps us build a space where we can all learn and grow together.